Hello, my name is Dolores Miranda Bolini, and with me is Natalie Rivera Raimundi, and we are both from the University of Puerto Rico. We are here to share our work on understanding microaggression and psychosocial community interventions. Why microaggressions? Well, let me give you some background. The census in Puerto Rico, since the last two censuses, there has been a tendency of Puerto Ricans to identify themselves as white. This has been a tendency, maybe like in the last 5 or 6 decades, where the identification as Black has been descending. Okay, now this has created major debates among the universities and academia and among many professional organizations. So the debate is still going on. We are trying to see what is happening and how to approach without the issue. And especially in the 68, there has been research related to racism and no racism. And Gaudreau, Isar, and Calle has also been doing research, which is ongoing on the topic, where they're bringing open the discussion of racism and see if we can progress in a better understanding and developing approaches to address and deal with such a difficult dialogue as it is racism. We have to acknowledge right now that there is in research which is documenting the domination of Black in certain coastal areas, whereas Franco and Ortiz work in a North Coast community. We were working in a South Coast community. And there is a fairly dominating Black population, okay, not necessarily acknowledged by the inhabitants, okay? We started to work with the children and some of the youth because we had a crime victims project there, in which one of the categories is aggression, and well, anyway. And what we did notice that the children were very, very outspokenly microaggressive. They would make all these these remarks openly, and at times, sometimes there were some very aggressive remarks, which ended up creating conflicts among the children. So we were very concerned about this, and although we did have dialogues with the children and the youth, we felt that maybe a strategy we can include in our workshops was to have use a scale, have a scales which beforehand can give us an idea of how the people stand with regard to identification of their race. So that's when we looked into the microaggression literature and found the definition by Darrell Wynn Sue, which refers to microaggressions as the very everyday verbal, nonverbal, environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentionally or unintentionally, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. At the time, NATO Kevin had wrote a book on trauma and microaggression. And we found that he had been developing the racial ethnic microaggression scale. So this was very important for us because as children, as victims of crime and the trauma, we wanted to be able to address how to address the trauma in order to prevent major traumas or post-traumatic traumas, which tended to express itself sometime in the adulthood or young adulthood, as documented by NATO. So what we did is we started then working on a scale with the purpose of having the data before we have the workshops and have the children and the youth work discussing the results on the scale, which is not addressed, it doesn't reflect themselves in a direct way, but they can see it through this data, and this would open up a much more a broader discussion on the topic. So that's where we came up with the idea of using the RIM in order to see who are victims or objects of microaggressions and those who are microaggressors. And that is our pilot, which we want to share just some data there, in the hopes that if you are interested, you may contact us and provide us with some suggestions. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to leave you with Natalie.
Thank you, Dr. Miranda. And as she mentioned, as part of the research project, we developed two skills. The first one aimed to examine the perception of the person that receives the microaggressions, while the second one aimed to examine or had the objective of measuring the perception of the person that engaged in the microaggression. In other words, the microaggressors. It is also important to mention that the scale was designed in a Likert style of 4 values that goes from never to often. Regarding the scale we developed in 2019 to examine the victim's perception, first we translated it from the language English to Spanish. Then we adapted the scale to the context of Puerto Rico, which this process included changing the word race for skin color. And this responded to the literature review about Puerto Ricans' perspective about race and how it is more associated with their skin tone. Then we went to the validation process, and as part of this process, we conducted a focus group in which the participants of the focus group suggested that we should include a dimension about microaggressions, specifically in the family context. After this, we had the opportunity to conduct a pilot test with a sample of 51 participants, and the majority of them identify as female, white, undergraduate students between the ages of 21 to 22, and Puerto Rican nationality. In general terms, the results of these pilot tests indicate that the majority of the participants are not an object of microaggressions. However, some of the participants have experienced some type of racial microaggressions in our society. Therefore, we're going to show some of the tendencies in the following categories. The first one is the Puerto Rican context. The tendency observed in this category was that almost half of the participants have never or rarely encountered this situation in which someone assumes they are not Puerto Rican based on their skin color, while at least 51% has experienced this situation. In terms of the acknowledgement, the majority perceive that sometimes and often they are told expressions like the one stated here in the item 26 about people of color no longer experiencing racism. And although this might seem correct, fails to acknowledge that the diversity of the human beings. Regarding representation, the tendency observed in this category was that the great majority of the participants perceived they are positively represented in different scenarios like school, work, and also media platforms. This could respond to the majority of the participants identifying as white. Regarding the scale developed in 2020, we decided to modify the items from the original scale to measure the microaggressor's perspective. And then we went to a validation process that included a second pilot test with a sample of 11 participants. As part of this process, we asked the participants what they thought about the items and how well they were constructed. And the answer that we received was that they felt threatened because of the way the items were constructed. And they suggested that should have a more indirect approach. The majority of the participants in this pilot test identify as female, white and black were equally represented, as well as undergraduate and graduate students. They belong to the 20 to 25 years of age group and also identify as Puerto Ricans. Now we're going to show the tendencies in terms of the category of Puerto Rican context. In contrast with the results of the first pilot test, these results indicate that only 30% of the participants have assumed sometimes and often that someone is not Puerto Rican based on their skin color. And although the majority have not assumed this, it is important to highlight that there is still a number of participants that have committed this type of microaggression. And finally, regarding the acknowledgement category, the results suggest that the majority have not acknowledged the human diversity by commenting expressions like the one here in the item 16 about all people regardless of their skin color are the same. Based on these results of the preliminary data, we then recommend that these areas need further attention. Now we're going with Dolores Miranda, who will close the session.
Hi, thank you so much, Natalie. Well, we don't have major conclusions except for the fact that we are very optimistic, and we know that we have currently we're not been able to use it with smaller children, but from children 11 and up, with the youth especially. The fact that they have a chance to discuss the results on the question on the S scale gives them an opportunity to have better understanding of what it means to be in a microaggressor or being victim, or what racism is, and be an object of racist interactions. So we leave it here in hopes that if you have any recommendations, and we'd be very happy to receive them. Thank you so much again, and very good health and welfare to you all. Thank you.